So once again for having me. And first, I'd like to explain the title of my presentation. Well, I have chosen to incorporate the names of the two realms known in Norse mythology as Niflheim and Muspelheim. The former, literally meaning home of mist, represents the domain of cold and ice. And by using this term, I'm making metaphorical reference to Scandinavia. As a Scandinavian study scholar, I have devoted over 20 years of my academic work to research of Nordic children's and young adult literature. And my particular focus was the therapeutic effect of literature, translation studies, and iconotexts. And in recent years, I have concentrated on analyzing the 9-volume series of books about the Moomins by Tove Jansson, and it will be the subject of the first part of my presentation. And Muspelheim, on the other hand, is the realm of fire, which I have symbolically chosen as the name of the second part of my talk. And this part will relate to my journey to Southern Africa, during which I try to gather information on children's literature, especially contemporary picture books in Zimbabwe. So let's get started with Niflheim. Although Tove Jansson is one of the most renowned representatives of children's literature in the world, I will briefly remind you of a few essential facts about her. Jansson was a Swedish-speaking Finnish artist, and she had a background in fine arts. While she created numerous paintings, illustrations, and frescoes, her worldwide fame came from her books and comics about the atypical trolls called the Moomins. In total, she authored and illustrated 9 volumes of the Moomin saga, and she made 3 picture books and numerous comic strips. After writing the last Moomin book, and it was in 1970, she shifted her focus to writing for adults. Despite the Moomins being almost 80 years old, they continue to enjoy immense popularity to this day. Well, the Moomin books have been a subject of numerous studies. Scholars from Scandinavia and beyond have analyzed the Moomin Valley from various perspectives. For example, biographical, psychological, pedagogical, or artistic. And we can even speak informally of a certain academic field called Moominology. The approach I have adopted in my research could be described as a blend of philosophical and translation studies perspectives. The former perspective stems from the observation that the Moomin books exhibit strong dual address characteristics, and the intertextual elements directed towards experienced readers are of philosophical nature. And the latter perspective arises from the fact that the Polish translations of these books had never been examined despite their long-standing popularity and continued reprints in Poland. Well, so far I have presented the results of my research in numerous articles as well as in the monograph published in 2019 in Polish and in Poland, and the literal translation of its title could be Philosophical and Translatological Wanderings in Moomin Valley. The primary aim of my Moomin research is to answer why the Moomin books are timeless and have been popular for generations with both children and adults. To achieve this objective, I revisit the Moomin books from the perspective of multiple address with a special focus on philosophical hypertexts. The concept of double address has been the central focus of my research in recent years. The phenomenon has been given various names and slightly different descriptions, but it essentially comes down to the observation that in most children's books there is invariably a second inherent reader, the adult. This is especially true for high-quality literature often awarded or considered classic. My book is divided into two parts. The first one, titled Wędrówki filozoficzne in Polish, in English more or less Philosophical Wanderings, comprises 10 chapters. In some of them, I point out the elements in the construction of plot lines, characters, and scenes that explicitly refer to the works of philosophers and psychologists whose research was known to Jansson and served as inspiration for her. The other chapters contain rereadings of the Moomin books from the perspective of literary response, psychology, and philosophy. The numbers on this slide correspond to the chapter titles, and the names in brackets indicate the hypertexts or their authors. I believe that most of the names or works mentioned in brackets do not require an introduction. However, I'd like to mention that Antoni Kępiński, this is chapter number 8, was a Polish psychiatrist and philosopher, while Norman Holland, chapter 10, was a psychoanalytic critic and author of a book, The Dynamics of Literary Response. Now I'd like to give you a little insight into my analysis. Chapter 1 deals with the theory of catastrophism, which was popular at the beginning of the 20th century. One of its interpretations was the popular work of a German philosopher, Oskar Spengler, in English Spengler. And the title of his work is The Decline of the West, though this is, of course, the English translation of the original German title. The first step of my analysis was to demonstrate that Jansson had contact with Spengler's views. The invaluable help and inspiration for my research, my work, came from the biography. Tove Jansson, Life Art Words, by the Swedish researcher Boel Westin. As evidence here, we can see the evidence in this quote. Tove Jansson knew the philosophy of Oskar Spengler. Next step of my analysis, it was indication which plotlines and characters in the Moomin saga are based on a given theory. In this case, in the second book, Comet in Moominland, the titular comet is a symbol of the catastrophe, while the side character, Masquerade, we can see him here, he's not maybe exactly a pure herald of Spengler's ideas, but rather a travesty of a philosopher, some kind of would-be philosopher. Interestingly, Jansson's fiancé at that time, Athos Virtanen, was a philosopher and read Spengler's works. But as Boel Westin put it, quote, the masquerade personifies rather the philosopher as an idea than the person himself, unquote. I also incorporate iconotexts into my analysis, which is particularly relevant in this example, because Jansson unambiguously showed in the illustration here that Masquerade was a reader of Spengler's monograph. We can see the name Spengler on the cover of the book. In another Moomin book, Finn Family Moomin Troll, Masquerade still reads philosophical literature, The Uselessness of Everything, which is an ironical allusion to Schopenhauer. Influenced by the reading, he speaks about the insignificance of material things. And the title, Om alltings onödighet, is just the Swedish title, which more or less means in English the uselessness of everything. And now a few words about chapter 7 of my book, entitled The Invisible. Karen Horney, a German psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, was the author of several popular books in which she presented her theory on the etiology of neurosis. Tove Jansson owned her books, and Neurosis and Human Growth from 1950 was definitely part of her reading. Once again, the evidence that Jansson was familiar with Horney's works can be found in Westeen's biography. Quote, Karen Horney formulated what is important, simple and clear, actually before I read her books, wrote Tove rather critically by admitting willingly that Horney was a revelation of her own writing. Tove actually used the English word revelation, unquote. In the early 1960s, Jansson was overwhelmed with work, unable to cope with being identified as the mother of the Moomins rather than with her painting career, and she felt compelled to seek the advice of a psychotherapist. As a result, she became interested in psychology, discovered Horney's works, and wrote the stories, among which the one about the invisible child received high praise. Reviewers, one after another, wrote about Tove Jansson as a psychoanalyst, moralist, and educator. And the short story itself was used in various therapeutic contexts. Quite paradoxically, the artist seeking solutions to her own problems was hailed as a therapist herself. As I mentioned, reading Horney's works inspired Jansson to write a collection of short stories. In the Swedish original, one of them, Det osynliga barnet, in English, The Invisible Child, provided the title for the entire volume, which is called Tales from Moomin Valley in English. In my study, I focused specifically on this story, which appears to be directly related to Horney's book, Neurosis and Human Growth. First, I outline the key thesis of Horney's theory and introduce the three attitudes to resolve inner conflicts. First, expansiveness, the other is resignation, and the third one is self-effacement. Next, I indicate which verbal and visual elements of the protagonist's characterization, the invisible Nini, correspond to the attitude of self-effacement. I also point out that Nini is not the only character associated with neurotic self-suppression. Several similar characters appear in other parts of the saga, for example, as invisible mice and Salome the little creep in Moomin Land Midwinter. Or for example, Tofu, we can see him on the left, Tofu from the picture book Who Will Comfort Tofu from 1960. Let's move on to the other part of my book, the Translatological Wanderings. It's a challenging task to describe translations of over 9 volumes, and in the necessary limitation of the analyzed issues, I have used the inevitably subjective criterion. I selected those aspects which I consider crucial for understanding the unique aesthetics of the series. Among them are 3. The first one, these are anthroponyms. The second one, language games and specific humor, which they create. And the third aspect, it was the cuisine. The first aim of my translatological study was to assess if the original double address was retained in the target text, that is the Polish translation. And the other aim was to pose questions about the impact of double address on translation and translation studies, and in particular the future of translation for children and its theory as a separate field of research. Methodologically, I follow the taxonomies of translation techniques by Anna Fornalczyk and Ivan Bertels. And some details you can see on this slide. The basic techniques I applied in my analysis included transfer, transcription, literal translation, substitution, and reduction. Obviously, in many cases, the employed techniques were hybrids of 2 or even 3 methods. And here is an example analysis of 2 character names, Migotek in Polish, the Snork in English, and Panna Migotka in Polish, the Snork maiden in English. And they are called respectively Snorken and Snorkfröken in Swedish. The original names of the siblings have the same first part, which comes from the adjective snorky, Swedish adjective snorky, which means in English snooty, snobbish, or conceited. The brother's name was created by combining the root snork and the suffix n. The snork is clever and resourceful, qualities that help him find solutions to any problem very, very quickly. And he's a bit snooty, but usually he acts with good intentions and thinks about the common good. His sister, his sister's Swedish name Snorkfröken is a combined word that connects the adjective root snork, from snorking, and the noun fröken, Miss Maiden in English. The first part shows her relation to her brother, and the second part indicates her gender. The shared element, snork, can be seen either as a trait she has in common with her brother or just a sign of their family bond. In the Polish version, the Snork maiden is Panna Migotka, in English more or less Miss Glittery, and her name comes from her love of trinkets. An anklet is her favorite accessory, which is highlighted in both the text and the pictures. Migotka is a made-up word, a nonce word, based on the verb migotać. Migotać in Polish, and in English, to flicker, to glitter, to flash. The second part of her original name, Fröken, was translated literally as Panna in Polish, Miss in English. Her brother's Polish name, Migotek, comes from hers. And at the end of each analysis, I identify the translation technique and I evaluate it in terms of double address. Each chapter ends with a table in which I compile the original word. Here is Polish translation, the translation technique, and finally, effect. Effect, as I said, in terms of a double address mode. And this is a little piece of one of these tables, which I have many in my book. Here are partial results of my analysis of the anthroponyms. Many of the names translated literally or transferred from the source text have retained the double address. The group of names which were predominantly translated by a transcription have retained the double address too. But the rechanneling of translations to young readers is most obvious in the group of names based on substitution. But luckily, I can say that the final conclusion is that the Polish translations of the 9 Moomin volumes are quite successful. I have also formulated potential implications for children's literature translation studies in the form of questions. Here are 2 examples of a few questions which I ask at the end of my book. Should the multiple address mode be taken into consideration in translating any children's book, or is it rather a typical feature exclusively of artistic, award-winning books described as quality literature? Is it possible for translation studies to identify and develop descriptive and normative theories that take multiple address into account? Well, if some of the presented issues have piqued your interest, you will be able to find more information in my book, which hopefully will be published this year in English by Peter Lang. I'm currently completing my second monograph on the Moomin books. This time I investigate them in a different way. First, I express doubts about stereotypical, selective, and single-addressed interpretations. Second, I read the series in relation to the present. I take up issues as equality debate or women's strike in Poland, climate issues, civilization diseases, and ageism. Well, let's now move from the far north to the far south, specifically to Zimbabwe, where I spent 3 months from January to March this year. After more than 20 years of researching Scandinavian children's and young adult literature, I decided to travel to Africa and to broaden, let's say, the scope of my academic interests. I wanted to see what reading culture among children is and what picture books addressed to them look like. My expectations, I must admit, were confronted by reality, and my story, which consists only of fresh observations and experiences, will be presented in the form of some failures and some successes. Okay, I will start with failures. Well, I could establish contact with a researcher from Zimbabwe Open University who had published articles on children's literature. Despite sending several messages, I didn't receive any response. It was exactly the same with contemporary book authors. One didn't reply to my messages at all, while the other initially agreed to give me interview, but finally she didn't respond either. The number of originally Zimbabwean books turned out to be very, very limited, as well as the number of bookstores. Although I managed to take a trip to the bush, I must say that this trip was not as fruitful as I had expected. I'm very, very happy that I managed to visit the African bush, although the appointment with a school headmistress didn't contribute much to my research. My questions about children's access to textbooks and gender equality issues were met with evasive answers. I was asked for my email address, and I was promised to be contacted later this way, but unfortunately, no one ever reached out. I quickly realized that telling the truth isn't easy when the reality in Africa differs from the official position of a government and the national curriculum. Moreover, I felt that my questions were a little naive or even sometimes inappropriate when not all children can afford education that is only theoretically free in Zimbabwe. Asking about a number of books read by children was also misplaced when books are, first, very expensive. Children have to walk to school sometimes even 15 kilometers, and the bush is not electrified, so it's already dark when they come back home after school. Moreover, children also have household duties such as carrying water. You can see it in the picture. They have to carry this water over very long distances sometimes, and boys very often graze cattle. Another confrontation with reality was my visit to the National Free Library in Zimbabwe, in Bulawayo. Bulawayo is the second largest city in the country, in Zimbabwe, after Harare, the capital city. Well, the building looked inviting, and I hoped to conduct research there, but when I came in, it was empty inside, and the lonely librarian informed me that the entrance fee was $5 and borrowing a book would cost me $20. I was also informed that the library had no books for children and young adults, and the collection included classics such as, for example, Shakespeare. The library was established during the Rhodesia era and still consists of collections from that time. I was also not allowed to take pictures inside because the library, I quote, is a state-owned building. So I could take pictures only from outside. Well, I found similar books on the shelf in a coffee shop in Bulawayo. They were again old Rhodesian books, like, for example, Thackeray, Dickens, Bronte, and again there was not a single title for children on this shelf. Now my small successes. I managed to find a few shelves with literature for the youngest readers in supermarkets, usually displayed along with stationery. These were exclusively English titles, or sometimes American ones, often classics like Little Golden Books. The popularity of this type of literature confirms the book can be confirmed by the bookstore from Harare. The name of this bookstore is Book Lady Zimbabwe, and they sell just children's literature. This bookstore maintains an updated website, and I think that the titles speak for themselves here. Another example is The Timeless Paddington, and The Proposal of a Birthday Gift and Blyton. And I must say that was not what I was looking for. But my biggest discovery was a souvenir shop that included a small bookstore inside with a shelf dedicated to children's books. Here there were classics in English again, but this is also where I managed to find the picture books I was interested in. To my surprise, two contemporary Zimbabwean picture books are quite similar. The protagonist of the first one, that's How We Roll, from 2020, and Debut, or Debut, from 2022, are dung beetles. The story of rolling balls by this very interesting insect is told by two white Zimbabwean authors in rhymed English with a large number of colorful illustrations. Debut has an educational character, teaching children about the habits of a beetle in a child-friendly way and introducing information about other insects and animals in Zimbabwe in an original manner, amusingly presented as the Little Five. The Little Five corresponds to the Big Five, that is 5 animals that must be seen on safari. The other book, that's How We Roll, is written, I would say, in eco-critical spirit, and it shows the threat of desertification in Africa. The Orange Elephant bookstore was also the place where I found the third picture book, and again about a dung beetle. Unfortunately, the front matter lacked basic information about its publication year. I still haven't managed to find out any details about it, as the book and its authors do not exist on the internet. However, the illustrations and the language indicate that it is a significantly older book. Its protagonist is also a dung beetle rolling a ball, this time harrying to his wife, and the text is again rhymed. The 3 picture books provide interesting comparative material, which I plan to thoroughly investigate in the future. The dung beetle inhabits these regions of Africa and quite amusingly accompanied me from the first days of my stay in Zimbabwe in Victoria Falls to the last days on a safari in Chobe, Botswana. And here is a short footage I recorded in Tove. I hope you can see the beetle and how hard it works. Well, the most valuable find was a book written by a Black Zimbabwean author, Eva Sibanda, partly in indigenous languages, Shona and Ndebele. This book is actually the type of literature that interested me the most. My first book of Shona and Ndebele words has a classic picture book format. It consists of 32 pages, including 10 double spreads. You can see one of them here. And they are dedicated to 10 thematic sections, which teach children basic vocabulary. While not innovative in terms of form, its uniqueness lies in being the first to teach vocabulary in the 3 main languages of Zimbabwe. And above all, the languages of 2 antagonized tribes, Shona and Ndebele. So as you can see, the first word is in English, then Shona, and then Ndebele. I have already analyzed this book and written an article about it titled Children's Literature as a Ray of Hope for Putting an End to Tribal Conflicts in Zimbabwe. I recounted the history of Gukurahundi, a bloody tribal conflict that ravaged Zimbabwe from 1983 to 1987. And I put a special focus on the experience of children. The children who were victims of this war still carry it in their memory as adults today, while contemporary youngest generation is a victim of repercussions of Gukurahundi that continue to wreck the nation in the form of so-called linguistic genocide. In the context of these vivid antagonisms, the article ponders whether my first book of Shona and Ndebele words represents a ray of hope for raising a new generation that would put an end to the long-time ethnic polarization in this country. On the left, you can see the cover of a monograph from 2022 that sheds light on the history of Gukurahundi and its implications for the current situation in Zimbabwe. And this book was of great help to me while writing the article. I hope my text will be published in Poland next year. Okay, all in all, I currently do not feel capable of undertaking a broadly scoped project comparing children's picture books from the Norse and the South. The complicated political and economic situation in Zimbabwe impacts all spheres of life, including children's education and the book market. And I don't feel morally authorized to evaluate the African reality from the Eurocentric perspective. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Hanna, for your very interesting and inspiring and fantastic talk. That I hope that reminded us how lucky we are living here and look further, not only through our Eurocentric perspective. So thank you very much. Now we have, of course, time for some questions, for discussion, for some comments. So please, if you have any, if you want to add something, if you want to comment or to ask questions to our today's speaker, you can raise your hand, or you can also write a question in the chat. We will read it. Okay, we have Mateusz. Okay.
Yeah, that's me. Thank you for this fantastic talk. I agree with Ella that it was such a rich talk, and I've learned a lot. I have a question when it comes to the second half of your talk. So the part devoted to Zimbabwe and Africa. You talked about all of the obstacles you faced in Africa and the limited number of books. And while listening to you, I kept on thinking about the importance of oral storytelling. So is it something that you thought about asking them, or maybe it's something that you have asked them? So maybe there are no printed books, but there are stories which are told, which are shared with children orally. It's more of a comment, but it's something that I kept on thinking about while listening to your wonderful talk. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the question. I expected something like this before going to Zimbabwe, but to tell the truth, it was not that easy sometimes to communicate in English. When I went to the bush, there were some language problems. So theoretically, there are 16 languages in Zimbabwe, but 3 of them are, key languages. As I said, English, and then Shona and Bella. But in the bush, it was not that easy to communicate. But as I understood, there are not so many traditional Zimbabwean stories for children, something like this, like good night stories, so unfortunately. But I haven't managed to collect any material of this kind. Maybe next time. I wanted to say that I could stay there only 3 months because I was given visa only for 3 months. It's not possible to extend it longer. So maybe next time when I organize another trip to the bush, and it's challenging, it's not easy, there is no public transport there. So there are no roads, and it was the rain season, so you can imagine it was not so easy to move around. But maybe next time I will manage to find something more. Now I focus on picture books. I had to limit my research.
Thank you. Ella, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. I said we have Terry. and the question.
Hello, Hanna.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. And I enjoyed your talk very much. And sometime I would love to talk to you about Moomins. I love the Moomins. But I also have a kind of like Mateusz, I have a question comment, I guess. And as you were talking, I was thinking about my experience living in a colonized post-colonial country. I'm Canadian, and I also have done work on Australian children's literature. And I wondered if you had thought about doing any contextualizing, I guess, a kind of a broader sense of the kind of colonial and then post-colonial process of the development of a children's literature industry. In Canada, for example, we didn't really have a children's literature. One of our great classics, Anne of Green Gables, was published in the US. We didn't have the infrastructure and that's kind of what I could hear you saying about Zimbabwe at this point. And then the other piece I was wondering about, thinking about the Australian context, Africa Taylor and some others have done a lot of work on the use of indigenous animals to create a sense of identity. Now they're talking about how colonizers use indigenous animals, but at some point, in a post-colonial context, does that become something different? So I was thinking about your dung beetle.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much for a comment. Well, it will be great to investigate this problems with from a broader perspective, post-colonial, something like this. But I feel I'm not ready yet to do something like this. Yeah. It would be great just to create a team of researchers from different countries and look at pictured books from this perspective. The problem is economy. You know, Zimbabwean economy is in a mess. And it impacts everything in the country, everything. So there are few books. Really, I have shown you 4 titles, and because I was looking for contemporary books, modern books, written by Zimbabwean authors. So I have found 4 of them from the recent years. So very little material. But if we were a team, if we had more resources, I think it might be really a great project. So thank you for this idea.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Terry. Waiting for other questions. We have some time for this. So maybe someone would like to something. I have a question for you, because you said something very strange for us, that about the library and lending a book that you were supposed to pay like $20 for lending one book. Was this the price only for you as a foreigner, or is it like standard for the citizens?
Thank you, Ella, for the question. No idea. There are different standards for Zimbabweans. There are different standards, prices, for example, anything is different for tourists. So you never know. You never know how much you will have to pay for something. Well, I hope that Zimbabweans do not have to pay so much, because, you know, the economic situation, I said a few times, is a disaster, really. So people would never, ever be able to pay so much for a book. But maybe it was just a price for me. Maybe the librarian wanted me to leave the library, which is I didn't find what I was looking for, let's say, but I felt strange inside, and I was forbidden to take photographs and everything. So he wasn't friendly in a way. So
it was like a journey in time, like Poland 40 years ago. I think maybe libraries were not so open to their customers too. And so what is the price of the children's book in Zimbabwe if the cost of lending is so high?
Yes, I will tell you. Well, the book, I have this book, $15 US. It's a thin picture book, 30 pages, $15. And, I think the teacher salary is about $300, but sometimes they don't get salary for many, many months. So it happens that they are given $15 per month and they wait for the whole salary, which comes or doesn't come. So it's a huge amount of money. It's not that cheap for us either, yes? It's not compared with the Polish prices. And sometimes there are such small versions. I have one of his books in a very little version. So then it can cost $5 US. But it's a tiny, tiny book. Otherwise, 15 for a picture book.
Okay. A lot of money. And those books that you found by Zimbabwean, I don't know how to say it, authors, those 4 picture books, can we call them like educational, informational picture books, because they were like early concept or something like this, and that you showed us, and the other 2 were like about nature, but how can we... What kind of picture book would you?
It's there is a plot in each of these books, and they are very similar. It struck me they are so incredibly similar. There is a rhymed text in English, all of them are written by white Zimbabwean authors. And this is a story of dung beetle rolling a ball, and there is some educational stuff inside. So, for example, Dibu teaches about different insects and animals and plants in Zimbabwe. It's a very interesting and beautiful book, very modern and very similar to our European picture books. And that's how we roll. It's a mix, a blend of fictitious story about, again, about a beetle rolling a ball, but there is some different message, I would say, because this book is about desertification, which is a huge problem in Africa. And this book has a big, I would say, paratext. There is a lot, it is partly informational book. It is divided into this fiction story about the dung beetle, again called, he has a name, his name is Lou, and he cannot find dung that he needs to roll a ball due to the desertification, yes? So there's a lot of information at the end of the book and at the beginning, what desertification means, what holistic management means. So this is a hybrid book, I would say. And this old one, strange one, because I couldn't find any information from which year this book comes from. Maybe it's very old, maybe it's not so old, nothing about it. It's a mystery. But anyway, it is sold in bookstores. And Dozy, the name of dung is Dozy. It's a very, very short story. And again, about rolling a ball for the beetle's wife. Very short story. So the male beetle maid rolled this ball and gave it as a kind of present to his wife at the end, because as we know, hopefully, the beetles lay eggs inside. Yes. So hybrid books, I would say, in some way.
Yes. Something very modern in Europe and in other Western countries now. So they try to create very similar books to the ones that are read all over the world.
Yes, very similar in some way, but what is so unique? We are about dung beetle, each of them, yes, but I don't know any European books about dung beetles, so it is different for me. And what's more, we have so many picture books in Poland, in Europe, in Scandinavia. It's difficult to buy them, to read them, and then when I went to Zimbabwe, I found 4. So that's a big difference in this sense.
What about translations? There are from which languages? From English? Not from English, but from maybe not translations, but from which countries do the books come? From the United States? From
Great Britain. Yes.
Okay.
It was a colony of Great Britain. Yes, Zimbabwe was a colony, but I didn't find so many picture books. I found some literature. I saw in Blyton, for example, or I saw some translations of Hans Christian Andersen, but these are classics, yes. And the modern literature, it is probably just English literature, yes, but few picture books.
Okay.
Well, I had some lectures at the college, girls' college in Bulawayo. Yes, I met some teachers, I met some students, I had some lectures, and I talked about my research, and I told them that I research into children's literature, into picture books, and all of them were shocked. Even the teachers, well, is it a job, is it work to deal with children's literature and earn money this way? Well, it was something, shocking, strange, surprising for them. So
it will be hard to do some research only on 4 picture books that are on their market. So.
Maybe there are more, but I couldn't find any information on internet. In the Republic of South Africa, yes, they have a lot of picture books. They have quite different, I would say, book market. But in Zimbabwe, not so much. Not so much.
So you're planning to come back?
Yes, I love to, but it's not that easy to organize. Well, now, as you know, I have sabbatical, so it was possible to go there. And and I spent my savings because it was not a cheap trip. So maybe in a few years I will return there. I would like to go to the Republic of South Africa because I was in Zimbabwe, short time in Botswana and Zambia, but I need more time to tell the truth and more resources to learn more. So there is a lot to do.
So I hope that you will apply for a grant, and fingers crossed for this, for your success. I hope that you will manage to get a lot of money and come back and continue your fantastic research.